I should say, as we begin, I am not a medical professional, I am not a doctor, nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. Always consult a professional, blah, 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 you understand. Nor am I a scientist, so although I'm going to talk about research, I don't necessarily have all the answers. But at our company, Nature's Laboratory, we have in-house 2 PhD qualified scientists who do our science and research and development. So if I can't answer a question today, I can certainly put you in touch with someone who would be able to answer any difficult questions. But just because you shouldn't take anything I say today as medical advice doesn't mean that you shouldn't take it seriously. And I hope what I have to say will be clear and kind of show why propolis should be taken seriously as 21st century natural medicine, which is what we believe it to be. So let's start with the problem. The problem is we operate within a society and a world now which is focused almost entirely on the production of pharmaceutical drugs, chemical drugs, and most of these are produced by large multinational companies that really have profit at their centre rather than people's well-being. A few years ago, a guy called Dr. Roses, who was a senior executive at GlaxoSmithKline, said in an article, and you can Google this, the vast majority of drugs, more than 90%, only work in 30 or 50% of the people. So most of the drugs don't work in most of the people. I'm not sure that most pharmaceutical companies would want people to know that, but the article's still up on the Independent website. You can look at it for yourself. But that's quite a claim, really, that most pharmaceutical drugs don't work in most of the people. They wouldn't necessarily want you to know that. And an awful lot of effort goes into persuading people otherwise. We're also faced with new and increasingly large and complicated health issues. Obviously, we've just come through a pandemic, but kind of alongside that is the growing problem of antibiotic resistance. And that's one of the areas that Be Vital, Nature's Laboratory, has been focusing on in recent years, looking at how propolis can help solve this problem of antibiotic resistance, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But even Alexander Fleming, who developed the first antibiotics, warned against antibiotic resistance becoming a problem due to overuse and misuse of antibiotics, over-reliance on chemical drugs, and eventually the bacteria work out how to get around it. And that's a massive problem, and the World Health Organization has said that antibiotic resistance is one of the biggest threats to global health, food security and development today. So the World Health Organization think it's one of the major health problems, and there aren't really any solutions coming from the pharmaceutical industry, except a couple of weeks ago a paper was released, and it was reported in The Guardian, I think, that a pharma company had found out how to genetically modify bacteria in order to then deal with the bacteria that wasn't being dealt with by the antibiotics. But I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm not sure that I'd want genetically modified bacteria putting into me. I'll leave that for you to decide. And here's a stat for you. For every $1 spent on research by big pharma companies, they spend $19 on marketing. So for every $1 spent on research, they spend 19 on marketing, which kind of shows you where the balance is and what kind of businesses these organizations are. I think if we did the numbers at Nature's Laboratory, we'd find the total opposite of that, which is why none of you know who we are. But I hope today to change that a little bit. Yeah, but it's quite interesting and quite alarming, I think, that so much money would be spent on advertising for pharmaceutical drugs. Research conducted between 2002 and 2011 determined that only 8% of new pharmaceutical products were clinically superior to existing similar drugs. So big pharma companies spend money, spend millions and billions on R&D, but actually a very small percentage of those new products are actually a breakthrough, a really tiny percentage. Most of them are only marginally, if marginally, better than something that already exists on the market. So all this money and time and expertise is spent on developing new solutions which are only very slightly, if at all, better than something that already exists. That doesn't seem like good value for money to me. And data from the US, recent data, shows that properly prescribed drugs, so that's drugs that people have received from a GP or a doctor when they've gone to hospital, result in 2 million hospitalizations per year. So those are drugs that are supposed to be making people better. They're given by the hospital, they're given by a doctor, they result in 2 million hospitalizations. So that's an adverse reaction to a pharmaceutical drug which is so severe that the patient has to go back into hospital to have that treated. It's quite alarming, and it's a best guess because there isn't data, but for every one hospitalization type reaction, the best guess is that there's about 30 reactions of a lesser extent. But these are things which are still causing people perhaps joint aches, headaches, nausea, lethargy, that kind of thing. So they're still impacting people negatively, these drugs that are supposed to be making people better. So I hope that kind of describes, I know it's pretty bleak, but I wanted to start with some facts and figures that kind of articulate where we're coming from at Nature's Laboratory and Be Vital when we talk about propolis as 21st century natural medicine. I think we're in a state where we need to be finding new solutions to these problems, and some of these new solutions are best found looking at old solutions and then pairing that with some scientific research to see if we can improve things yet further, and that's basically what we do at Be Vital. So that's the problem. As we've said, today we're talking about propolis, and I hope that I'm presenting it as a part of a solution. I don't expect you all to rush out and buy bucket loads of propolis capsules, but at least it might make you think and give you some alternative options to look at next time you're poorly or you know someone who is. But we're also going to see how propolis can help with kind of everyday health and well-being. It's not just something for a special occasion. It can be something that you can use all the time to give your body and some immune support. So to get started, let's have a quick look at what propolis is, because obviously most of you in here are beekeepers. You'll have come across propolis in your beehives, but not everyone knows what it is. So for the sake of clarity, propolis is made from plant resins. The bees collect the resins from trees and plants in the vicinity. They don't just use the poplar tree, which is a kind of myth around propolis. They'll use whatever plant resins there are available. And propolis, when you see it in the hive, is about 50% resins, it's about 30% beeswax, it's about 10% essential oils, and it's about 5% pollen and 5% other stuff like bits of twig or wing or something else. It's only produced by Western honeybees, but Western honeybees, I'm reliably informed, are found all around the world, and so propolis is found all around the world. But different bees in different places produce more or less, and it's been suggested this morning that we do some research to look at why that is and see if we can make more bees make more propolis, because that would be helpful for them as well as for us. Because of the variety of plants that the resins are harvested from, propolis can look different in different places. So in Brazil, for example, they have both red and green propolis, and it's quite vibrant in colour sometimes, but then in more kind of temperate climates it's mostly brown, and the colour kind of reflects the combination of chemicals that's in the propolis. And one of the really interesting areas of research is around the kind of how propolis varies in medicinal property based on where it's been made, and that's because of the variety of chemicals that end up in the propolis that give it its medicinal properties. The bees use propolis in the hive in a number of ways. They'll coat the entire inside surface with propolis sometimes. They'll fill holes with propolis. They'll make intricate entrances to stop intruders getting in or to keep drafts out, that kind of thing. They use it to strengthen honeycomb. So I'm told that for every 1 pound of wax in a honeycomb, it can support 25 pounds of honey. Primarily that's because of the strengthening nature of the propolis. It's not the wax itself, it's supported by the propolis. They use it to protect their young when they're growing in the cells. They'll cap each cell with a layer of propolis. It's antifungal, it's antibacterial, it stops any infection getting in and affecting the growing baby bee. And as well as kind of making it to block holes and do things proactively, they will make it all the time and just store it up for when they need it. And they can use it to stop the spread of bacteria within the hive. So a mouse might get into a beehive, they can sting it to death, but then they can't move it anywhere, so they'll cover it in propolis and effectively mummify it, which stops the bacteria spreading and infecting the colony. You might have seen this, I'm getting some nods. Yeah, so effectively they're trapping the bacteria within this kind of layer of propolis, and it stops it causing a problem. And because of all of this, because of the propolis and how they use it in the hive, the beehive is known to be one of the most sterile environments in nature, which is a real surprise when you look at the kind of facts and figures around what's happening in a beehive. It's very similar to a human body, 35 to 37 degrees, very high levels of humidity most of the time. It's the perfect breeding ground for bacteria, and yet because of propolis, it's also one of the cleanest, most sterile environments. And that's interesting to know, and it kind of demonstrates that the bees are using propolis as an external immune system, so they don't have much immunity in themselves, but the propolis is kind of protecting them from external bacterial threats, fungal threats, viruses, that kind of thing, and keeping the colony operating healthily. So that's what propolis is and how it's used by the bees. And there's a long history of humans using propolis. It goes back, well, records go back to the ancient Egyptians, who would melt down, their priests would melt down entire honeycombs and then dip bandages in them before applying them to bodies which were being mummified. And the entire honeycombs, of course, would include the propolis. So they weren't necessarily recognizing that there was this extra material that wasn't wax or wasn't honey, but because it was included within the liquid that they were melting down, that they were then applying to the bandages to then wrap people in, as well as the honey being a preservative, the propolis was obviously contributing to that. Aristotle is the guy in ancient Greece who is said to have come up with the word propolis. It's from two Greek words, pro meaning before and polis meaning city. So it's before the city or defender of the city, which gives you an idea of how he perceived propolis and what it was doing. It was defending the colony, protecting them from invasion. And it was Hippocrates, who is widely kind of attributed as the father of modern medicine, who started prescribing propolis, and he actually records in some of his documents prescribing propolis for the treatment of healing sores and ulcers, that kind of thing. So putting it on the surface of the skin and it having a healing effect. Then a little bit later on, there's Pliny the Elder in Rome, and he wrote extensively about bees. He had lots of knowledge about bee colonies and how bees lived and what they got up to at the weekend. And he noticed that propolis was very beneficial for the bees, and so he started giving it to people for healing their problems as well. He noted that it reduced swelling, it softened hard tissues and calluses, it soothed pain, and it healed sores. So this is 2,000 plus years ago. They're recognizing that propolis has a properly healing kind of effect and can be applied to all kinds of injuries and illnesses. There are also several references to propolis in ancient Middle Eastern texts, but there are actually surprisingly few in Western and Northern Europe from a similar time. Although there are writings which reference the healing power of plant resins. So there was this kind of knowledge that plant resins had some kind of anti-inflammatory, antibacterial property, but they hadn't kind of connected that with propolis, and maybe it's just that we weren't doing so much beekeeping or paying attention to bees up here? I'm not sure. But there was far more understanding in Southeast Europe and Russia, where propolis has been used for a long, long time, continues to be widely used today, particularly in Georgia and that kind of area. So there's a long history of people using propolis to heal various ailments, but it hadn't really taken off in Western and Northern Europe, which is perhaps why we don't have a kind of cultural memory of propolis as a natural remedy. Obviously beekeepers and people who've kept bees will have known more about it and perhaps will have used it, but it hasn't kind of spread into our wider society as something that's valuable, which is something we're trying to turn around now. And the way that we're primarily trying to do that is through scientific research. And over the last 100 years or so, there's been a lot of research done into propolis, primarily done in Russia and Eastern Europe, Soviet Union countries. And perhaps the reason why most research has been done there is because in Western nations, Western Europe and America, for example, with the rise of pharmaceutical drugs and patentable, protectable medicines, to be researching something which can't be protected and which is freely available to anyone who would seek it out probably seemed like a bit of a waste of time to those with the money to sponsor these kinds of research projects. Whereas in communist Soviet Union countries, there was no such thing as a patent, so you couldn't protect something, so they were free to research things which seemed to have value, which is why an awful lot of the research, which is very well documented in James's book, comes from Russia and Eastern Europe, and it's only in the last 20, 30 years or so that we've seen far more interest in propolis from Western nations, and now there's a strong kind of network of researchers from around the world, all looking at propolis in their different parts of the globe, and that's obviously stimulating lots of conversations about how propolis varies in different places and what the medicinal properties are, and I'll mention a bit more about that later on. So our own research at Be Vital has been mostly around connecting with universities in the UK. So initially it was Strathclyde in Glasgow, did lots of research with them, and then other distinct projects with different universities, Oxford, York, and most recently Leeds Beckett, and we've been looking at antibiotic resistance and propolis. When bacteria enters the body, it will begin to multiply, and as it multiplies, it creates what's called biofilm, and it's a kind of protective layer over the top of the bacteria that allows it to multiply without being destroyed by your immune response or by antibacterial drugs. A good example is plaque. So plaque on your teeth is actually bacteria that's multiplied and produced a biofilm coating, and as we know, it's pretty difficult to get off. So if you imagine that going on internally, it's quite a difficult problem to deal with. And our research with Leeds Beckett was looking at what happens when you treat a resistant bacteria with antibiotics, or with propolis, or with antibiotics and propolis. And the results appear to show that if you take a bacteria which is resistant to antibiotics and you treat it with a combination of the antibiotic that you would normally prescribe plus propolis, it has the effect of re-enabling the antibiotic process. And it's difficult to know exactly why. Obviously more research will be needed to determine the exact kind of reason why this appears to be the case, but what seems to happen is that the biofilm is inhibited. So the bacteria might multiply, but it can't create this biofilm layer which makes it then susceptible to the drugs or to your body's normal immune defense system. So yeah, as we saw at the start, the World Health Organization are warning that antibiotic resistance is a massive problem. I would suggest taking propolis alongside a course of antibiotics is going to improve the efficacy of the antibiotics, but as I said, I'm not a doctor. Don't quote me on that, but it might be worth trying if you get some antibiotics at some point. So that's a recent project we've been doing with Leeds Beckett. In the summer, we're about to start another project with University of East London looking at extraction processes. So traditionally, propolis has been harvested from the hive, and the kind of the most basic form of medicinal propolis would be a tincture. Obviously, you can chew it or apply it as it is, but if you want to produce something else from it, then it's normally turned into a tincture, which is an alcoholic extraction. And this project that we're starting is going to look at improving the extraction process so that we get more beneficial chemicals out of the propolis. And this book was written about 20 years ago, and I think the number of chemicals discovered in propolis at that point was about 150, and now we know there's at least 300, it seems. So in the last 20 years, so many more chemicals have been found to exist within propolis, and I'll talk a bit more about how they work shortly, but yeah, if we can optimize the extraction process to get more of those out, then obviously we're going to end up with a more effective, more efficient treatment. We also partner with Bradford University, and my colleagues Shankar and Bagashri, who are our kind of research department, have both joined Nature's Laboratory through a KTP, which is a knowledge transfer partnership, where a university will partner with a business to provide a student and associated university support in terms of access to equipment and that kind of thing. So they've both come to us through Bradford University, and it was with Bradford that we developed our B-Gel product, which is a little picture of it there, which is a kind of like a Bonjela, like an oral gel, but Bradford did lots of research into how to make it stick. And because propolis is so resinous, actually the natural kind of properties of propolis really lend itself to using in the oral cavity, because it's far more sticky than any kind of high street alternative, Bonjela or the like. So that's one of the projects we've done with Bradford. And alongside that, James has been busy doing other things in research. So the main thing to talk about is the IPRG, which is the International Propolis Research Group, and it's a collective of researchers from around the globe. It was set up maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, and it includes universities in Brazil and Portugal, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, and we've run so far 2 online conferences, 1 physical conference, and there's another one due this autumn. And the purpose of the IPRG is to get researchers who are looking at propolis together in one space to share their findings, to work out how they can work together to kind of improve propolis research and to let people know what they're finding out. So if you want to know more about the very kind of scientific end of what we do, then you can have a look at iprg.info. That's the website address, and you'll see there's links to previous conferences, and there's lots of videos, so you can watch the talk. Some of them are only short, and many of them have real life examples of where propolis has been used to treat people. So there's lots of good videos showing dental work, that kind of thing, and how propolis has healed the mouth in far more quickly than would have been expected otherwise. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look through some of the research for yourself. But I guess the main thing to say is that all this research has demonstrated that propolis is safe to use. People have been using it for thousands of years. It has very low levels of reaction. And even if you're allergic to other bee products like pollen or bee stings, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be allergic to propolis. So it can be widely used by people. And it has very few interactions or side effects with other drugs. And obviously that's a bit of a problem sometimes, especially in a society where everyone's taking something. But it also shows that propolis is effective. Of course, we wouldn't carry on using something if it had no benefit. And those who have used it over the years obviously vouch for its effectiveness. It's not to say it's going to work in every case, in every person, but certainly there's enough data to demonstrate that it's a highly effective natural medicine. And a good example of that is a couple of weeks ago, a paper was published by a student who had been at Leeds Beckett a few years ago, and they'd done a research project looking at our mouthwash, so Be Vital Propolis mouthwash, versus Corsadil, the high street alternative. And they found that B Vital Propolis mouthwash was more effective at inhibiting bacterial growth than Corsadil, which is quite a claim to be able to make, that something that's got no kind of chemical pharmaceutical ingredients is more effective at inhibiting bacteria than a high street brand. Most people are wary of natural alternatives, but I think it's information like that which is coming about through scientific research undertaken at reputable universities and laboratories around the world is going to help kind of people get over this fear of using something that hasn't come from one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And there's the web address for IPRG if you want to have a look at that later on. So when it comes to medicinal properties of propolis, there's quite a long list. Propolis has been seen to be anesthetic, anti-allergen, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antiseptic, anti-tumour, antiviral, and immune support or immunomodulatory. Yeah, it's just quite a long list, which again isn't to say that it's some kind of universal panacea, but because of the chemical kind of makeup of propolis, it's got these 300 or so different chemicals in it, flavonoids and phenols. They work together to cause this wide variety of medicinal properties, whereas a pharmaceutical drug is generally very refined and very focused, and it does one thing, and it does it destructively. And I think that's the thing to know about propolis and how it works within the in the body, is that it's not a kind of cruise missile type of drug. It's not like a pharmaceutical antibiotic which goes in and destroys. And of course, the problem with antibiotics, is that yes, it will destroy the harmful bacteria in your body, but it will also destroy good bacteria in your gut. And your good bacteria in your gut is responsible for helping your immune system function well. So you can be taking an antibiotic to solve a problem and simultaneously be giving yourself another problem. So quite a few people who know about propolis will take propolis at the same time as antibiotics because it improves the effectiveness of the antibiotic, but it also has a kind of prebiotic effect in the gut and protects the good bacteria. Propolis is... I know, I don't want to skip ahead yet. So there's this quite long list of properties, and if you have a look in the book, you'll find all the research that backs up why, how we can make these claims effectively about propolis. Unfortunately, the medical regulation in the UK is such that we can't make any medicinal claims on any product packaging. So you can't say this product is any of these things. You just have to say it's traditionally been used to soothe sore throats or something kind of fairly ambiguous, which isn't going to end us up with a legal case against us. But it is frustrating because there's so much evidence, proper scientific studies done. It's really frustrating to not be able to say on the bottle, this will do X, Y, and Z. We have to be quite ambiguous with our language. But that's not to say there isn't plenty of evidence to support propolis being used to treat all kinds of problems. And subsequently, propolis can be used to support everyday health and well-being. So some of our products, like our oral health range, are designed to just give you a small dose of propolis regularly to help with general well-being. Some of the chemicals in propolis are highly anti-inflammatory, and inflammation is linked to lots and lots of illnesses and diseases. So by taking a little bit all the time, you're equipping your body effectively to deal with these problems when they arise. It also has a kind of immunomodulatory effect, which means it can stimulate the production of your immune response effectively. So a bit like when you are treated with a what's the word? We've been talking about them for 3 years. Injection. What's the word? A vaccine. Yeah. And you're exposed to a little bit of the drug. The idea is that obviously it trains your immune system to respond when it sees that not a little bit of the drug, a little bit of the infection, so that your body responds better when it sees that infection in real life, as it were. And propolis has a similar effect, that it kind of boosts your immune system, it helps your immune system function more effectively. So there are kind of products that can be used all the time. Probably a good example, aside from the oral health range, is the propolis cream, which has a standard kind of moisturising content, so it can be used every day as a normal kind of moisturising cream, but because of the propolis in it, it's really good for treating things like eczema and psoriasis and other kind of inflammatory problems. We also had a lady ring up and just before Christmas and tell us it was excellent as a tattoo balm. So if you know anyone who's really into tattoos, then get them some propolis cream, because of the anti-inflammatory properties, it really helps soothe. I haven't had a tattoo, so I can't really imagine what it's like, but I know they go crispy and not very nice for a while, and it helps with that healing process and speeds it up. So yeah, it can be used to target specific conditions like tattoos. It can help manage chronic conditions, so things like diabetic inflammation. You can take propolis capsules regularly to help deal with the effects of the inflammation in your body. And there's a very interesting kind of process that causes inflammation. When you cut yourself or a cell ruptures in your body somehow, whether that's through trauma or some other illness or disease process, it kicks off a reaction which results in the release of histamine and the leakage of liquid from capillaries. And that's what causes redness and swelling and discomfort. Propolis has in it a chemical called, I think I might have to go back a bit. No, I've lost where I put it down. Oh no, there we go. Called CAPE, or caffeic acid phenylethyl ester, which prevents this reaction from taking place. So it blocks the body from responding in a certain way. So an interesting way to use propolis, I was chatting with a dentist about this, and he said that he prescribes quite high levels of propolis capsules before dental surgery, so that when you go for your surgery and your body is traumatized, the following kind of inflammatory process is reduced dramatically because of the propolis. So you don't get so much swelling, the discomfort, and obviously if any of you have had an extraction or that kind of thing happening in your mouth, it can be very uncomfortable, and it's very uncomfortable primarily because of the inflammation that occurs afterwards. I had my wisdom teeth out in my early 20s, and I didn't know about propolis, and I wish I did. My face ended up looking like Mr. Incredible, and I'm sure it would have been helped by taking some propolis to manage the inflammatory process. It can also be used to treat acute illness or injury. So as well as treating chronic conditions over a long period, you can obviously take capsules or tincture, that kind of thing, to treat something kind of on a daily basis. But if you've got an acute problem like a cut or a burn or a rash or something, then you can obviously apply propolis to that specific ailment. Again, it doesn't necessarily work in the same way as a pharmaceutical does. You might want to take, for example, propolis capsules to treat something that appears to be a surface problem. So if it's eczema, for example, it might be caused by some autoimmune response to something you're allergic to, and so you might not want to treat the condition directly. You might need to treat it some other way, but it can be used to treat things very effectively, and there are records of people, again in the book you can have a read, using it to treat pain directly, by a bit like the Egyptians soaking bandages in honey and wax and propolis, the modern day equivalent effectively, and using it to treat things like bed sores or wounds that aren't healing. And you'll probably be aware that honey's been used a lot for that kind of thing, but propolis is kind of honey on steroids effectively. So if you want to use it to treat a wound, you can do, though be careful with the alcohol tincture because it can cause problems with skin, but there are non-alcoholic alternatives that could be equally helpful. And again, there's a massive long list of things that can be treated with propolis and evidence for its use in that way. So this isn't just a list of illnesses that may or may not be affected by propolis, but it includes allergies, arthritis, asthma, bed sores, bone regeneration, bronchitis, burns, colitis, coughs and colds, dental problems, diabetes, eye problems, flu, fungal infections, and loads more. So it is quite helpful, quite useful. But how does it work? More specifically, as we said, it's not like a cruise missile, it's not kind of a focused, targeted drug. It contains this big collection of different flavonoid and phenol chemicals, and it's not that these chemicals are only found in propolis, they're found in all kinds of fruit and veg, they're naturally occurring in all organic material. It's just that in propolis they're in a very high concentration, and there's a specific variety of them because of how they've been harvested. And it seems that they work in a kind of synergistic effect. So there have been studies done where single chemicals have been identified within propolis, and then they've been synthesized or they've been created some other way on their own and used to treat something, and the effect is not the same as using propolis, which has this broad spectrum of chemicals within it. So it seems like they work together, and again, it's a bit like the beehive. A single bee on its own isn't going to be able to make much honey, isn't going to be able to pollinate many trees, but 70,000 bees in a colony together has a massive effect on its environment, and it seems like it's a similar deal with the propolis that they produce, that a single chemical can only do so much, probably not have a very beneficial effect, but this combination of chemicals working together has this wide variety of medicinal properties. And as we've said, it seems to disable rather than destroy. So a pharmaceutical drug is designed to destroy a virus or to destroy a bacteria, but propolis seems to work by inhibiting the normal behavior of a bacteria or a virus. So it will prevent a virus from connecting to a human cell and then beginning to multiply and cause damage. It doesn't necessarily destroy it. It will still be in your system, but it will be disarmed to the point where it can't cause problems. And the same as we've seen with bacteria, that it prevents the bacteria from operating in a way which protects the bacteria from being destroyed by the human body's natural immune process. It doesn't destroy the bacteria itself, it just makes it not operate in the same way. And it also supports normal immune function, so as we've seen, it kind of boosts your normal immune response, which means that instead of you needing drugs when you get poorly, your body is more capable of defending itself. And I think we've got a problem with medicine in general in the UK and other Western nations, that it's seen as something to take once you become poorly rather than something that we do to help prevent us from becoming poorly. And partly that's because of the rise of pharmaceutical drugs which are designed to tackle a specific issue, and of course you only want to be taking them once you've got whatever the problem is. Whereas for generations it's obviously been understood, and I think we do get this on some level, it's just not yet translated into kind of medicine, that if you eat a healthy diet you will be more healthy and your body will respond better when you get poorly. And part of eating a healthy diet and looking after ourselves is prevention of illness, prevention of infection, that kind of thing. So propolis can be used as a kind of preventative measure, just like the bees produce it to prevent infection, but they also use it to target specific problems in the hive. And I think we just need to get our heads around that as a society and think about what we can do to strengthen our immune systems before we get a medical problem, not once we're in the middle of a problem, by which point it's more difficult to treat. So what? Well, kind of open-ended question. It's up for you to decide whether you think propolis is something worth kind of investigating more and using more or not. I hope I've given you enough information to think seriously about it, and again I would encourage you to have a look at the IPRG website, where you'll find lots of very scientific information. It's not for the faint-hearted, some of that content, because it is research done by scientists and then often not very good at explaining it in simple language. But it's probably worth a look at just to see the kind of breadth of things that are being explored and how propolis is being looked at. But I think my main aim with this talk and with us being here today and talking to beekeepers and explaining a bit about what we do is just to let people know that propolis is a safe and effective natural medicine. It's not some old wives' tale. It's not just something that crazy beekeepers do. It is a natural medicine, and it should be taken seriously, and the scientific research is kind of irrefutable. There's such a mountain of it now that it can't really be brushed aside as just a kind of fairy tale. Propolis is proving to be a really valuable natural medicine, and that's why we think at Be Vital that it's natural medicine for the 21st century. It's something that through scientific analysis and research can of course be optimized, but you can only optimize something that already has a function, and propolis clearly has a major health benefit function. It's been used for millennia to heal and protect, and we're very quick to forget that. You know, obviously our kind of pharmaceutical drugs have only been around for a few decades. Before that, people were using natural medicines of all kinds and finding them very effective, which is not to say that everything's safe and effective, but certainly propolis is. And of course, propolis is available freely around the globe. Wherever there are Western honeybees producing propolis, propolis is available, and so it's potentially a medicine that can be accessed very cheaply by people who don't have access to other forms of healthcare. And actually there's probably some benefit in that, obviously, in terms of antibiotic resistance and that kind of thing causing problems now. We don't want to be dependent on pharmaceutical drugs, and if we can encourage people to look at alternative natural sources, then that's got to be a good thing to do. It can't be protected and patented, so yes, we run a business, but there's nothing that we make that can't be made by other people, and therefore it's a very kind of democratic form of medicine. And we are actively working with people around the globe, Southeast Asia, Kenya. We're looking to set up, no, not Kenya, Nigeria, to look up, to set up kind of local refining plants with local people using local propolis so that they can produce local propolis medicines for their communities. That's something we really want to get involved in to demonstrate that this is natural medicine that's available, should be available to people around the world. And not at a great price. And of course, all the scientific research continues to go on. James's book was published 20 years ago, so there's actually very few references to kind of recent research, and certainly nothing from the last 2 decades, which is all the stuff that Be Vital's been involved in. So for more of that, obviously there's the IPRG. You can look on bevitalpropolis.com. There's references to research projects there. I'd encourage you to have a look at it for yourself and make your own conclusions. But of course, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention some of our products at the end. So all of this research, all of this analysis has led to the production of our range of products at Be Vital. We've got some different ranges, so the whole health range is the capsules, tablets and the liquids, which are kind of can be used to treat chronic conditions or topically applied. We've got the oral health range, which is toothpaste, mouthwash, throat spray, and they're just really good replacements for your standard kind of high street alternative. Skincare, including cream and lip balm, which is really effective, and honeys with propolis and pollen in. Pollen's an interesting one. I haven't talked about it, of course, but it's an actual superfood. It's really high in vitamins A and B. It's got loads of zinc, which is good for your immune system. It's got iron. It's also really high in protein. It's got more protein per gram than beef and chicken. So if you're a bodybuilder, pollen's probably going to be a good thing to try. It's a proper superfood. And some of our honey has pollen, added pollen. So how can you be involved? in helping us get the word out about Propolis? Well, you could buy some of our products, that would be helpful, but you could buy them and give them to your friends, and that would probably be more helpful because then they would know something about Propolis as well. You can explore the BARC project. So James has a kind of vision to establish a centre for research and kind of further understanding of how bees operate. So not just about Propolis, but about all the stuff that bees do. And he's looking to establish a centre in the North York Moors called the BARC, which will house this activity, and it will be kind of formed out of hexagonal shaped buildings and that kind of thing. It's a massive project. He's just about to get underway. Our friend Paula Carnell, she's getting involved to help kind of coordinate, encouraging people to be enthusiastic about it, and we hope that it will become a kind of centre for bee work in the UK in future years. And if you're a beekeeper and you've got Propolis and you want to send us some, then you can do that. We are undertaking the global Propolis survey, but we're happy to take as much Propolis from the UK as we can get our hands on. So if you want to send us samples, I think the minimum requirement for the analysis process that it's put through is about 300 grams. But you can just post us your samples. We do need to know kind of exactly where it came from, and also a bit about the kind of plants and trees that exist in the area that it was produced. But if you want to know more about that, I've got some leaflets on our table, so you can come and have a chat to me about that afterwards. Because we'd love to end up with Propolis produced in different parts of the world, which has different medicinal properties identified within it, so that you can use it to target specific illnesses, because depending on where it's produced, it has more antibacterial or more anti-inflammatory or more antiviral properties. So that's where we're headed. And I hope that we'll be able to encourage enough beekeepers in the UK to get involved that we'll be able to soon produce all of our Propolis products from UK Propolis. That's the aim. At the moment we've been limited because there's limited supply and there isn't a refining kind of process established in the UK, but we're working quickly to resolve that. And so if you have lots of hives or lots of Propolis, then by all means get in touch. And if you have any questions, you may start asking them now.
One question.